reality is the main story, but the most interesting things have always been off the beaten path. Welcome to Side Quests of Reality, the paranormal investigation podcast for people who know the official story is never the whole story.
Usually when you look up at the night sky, you have this innate expectation of absolute predictable mechanics.
Right, totally.
Like you look up and you see the North Star exactly where it's supposed to be, or you see the rigid geometry of Orion.
Yeah, that's familiar.
Exactly. Or maybe you catch a flashing strobe moving at a steady clip at 30,000 feet, and your brain instantly categorizes it. You say to yourself, that's a commercial airliner flying out of O'Hare. Everything just makes sense.
It's a comforting binary for us. What you're looking at is either a celestial body governed by orbital mechanics, or it's a human-made aircraft governed by conventional aerodynamics.
Right.
We rely heavily on that categorization, really just to navigate our reality without constantly feeling a sense of existential dread.
Yeah, that makes sense, because on the evening of March 13th, 1997, for thousands of people spread across hundreds of miles of the American Southwest, that clean categorization just completely failed.
It absolutely did. The sky stopped behaving.
We're bringing you into a deep dive today on Case File SQR-UFO-004, the Phoenix Lights incident. And we're looking at a mass observation that actively refuses to fit into that binary of celestial body or conventional aircraft.
And, the reason it's so difficult to process isn't because the data is sparse. It's actually because the data is just overwhelming.
Which is so rare for these kinds of things, right?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
That is the defining characteristic of this specific source material. Usually, diagnostic muddy waters happen because we only have, one blurry photograph or one isolated witness out in the woods.
Right, the classic single camper story.
Exactly. This is the exact opposite of that. We are dealing with an event observed by somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 people.
I really want to pause on that number for you listening. Because in the realm of unidentified aerial phenomena, 10,000 independent witnesses is a statistical anomaly in itself.
It really is staggering.
We aren't talking about a passing glance out of a car window here. We're talking about people stopping their evenings, standing in their driveways, and watching a sustained structural event for minutes at a time.
And we are going to approach this with the methodical weight that a mass sighting of this scale demands.
Yeah, there's zero need to dramatize the Phoenix Lights.
None at all. We don't need eerie music or, huge speculative leaps. The measured, documented facts provide more than enough friction against our understanding of the world.
The friction is honestly the fascinating part to me, because at the center of this mass sighting is a paradox that is just incredibly hard to reconcile.
The governor.
Yes, the sitting governor of Arizona at the time, Fife Symington. So, in the days following this event, his state is in an absolute uproar.
Total panic.
Right, the switchboards are flooded, people are demanding to know what flew over their houses, and he goes on national television and turns the entire thing into a punchline just to calm everyone down. He actively mocks the sighting.
Yeah, he orchestrated a very deliberate piece of political theater.
But then, after leaving office, he stays quiet for a decade. 10 years of total silence on the matter.
Which is a long time to keep something like that under wraps.
A really long time. Only to emerge and state publicly that he had actually been outside that night. He looked up and he had seen the exact massive, silent formation his constituents were reporting.
And his description of what he saw was that it was not of this world.
Not of this world. Coming from a career politician, that might just sound like a plea for attention.
Sure, but Fife Symington was a former Air Force pilot.
Which changes everything.
It really does. When a military aviator exhausts their mental inventory of conventional aircraft, experimental designs, and atmospheric phenomena and lands on a phrase like that, we have to evaluate the specific parameters of what he and 10,000 other people were actually looking at.
So to even begin to evaluate those parameters with you, we have to map this out. We can't just start with the visual. We have to start with the environment. Let's look at the stage where this all played out.
Phoenix, Arizona, in March of 1997.
Right. The geography and the culture of the location are critical variables here, aren't they?
Absolutely. If you look at a topographical map of the Phoenix metropolitan area, it is essentially a massive flat desert basin.
They call it the Valley of the Sun for a reason.
Exactly. It is entirely ringed by these rugged mountain ranges. And in 1997, you have a population of around 1.5 million people living in this basin.
And weather in March is, well, it's pretty specific.
Yeah, the meteorological conditions are highly specific. You're looking at practically zero humidity, incredibly clear air, and just this expansive sky.
It's a very outdoor culture. Like at 8:00 p.m. in March, people aren't huddled inside fighting the winter cold, right?
No, not at all.
And they aren't hiding inside from the brutal summer heat yet either. They're on their patios, they're walking their dogs, they're grilling out back.
A significant percentage of the population is simply outside, naturally looking up at a very clear, very wide desert sky.
Which creates the absolute perfect observational conditions for an anomaly.
It does. But the anomaly did not actually originate over Phoenix.
Right. The timeline and the geographical path of this object are what immediately dismantle the most common skeptical arguments.
Really do.
I'm going to track the route laid out in the source material for you, because the sheer distance is staggering. The very first reports did not come from Arizona. They started at approximately 7:40 p.m. in Henderson, Nevada.
Which places the origin point of the observation just outside of Las Vegas.
From Henderson, the reports begin to form a very distinct, deliberate corridor moving southeast. We have logged sightings passing over Paulden, Arizona.
Them's Prescott.
Right, down through Dewey, over Chino Valley, passing Wickenburg.
And notice the topography of that road. It's tracking from the higher elevations of northern Arizona, navigating down toward the desert basin.
And then it just drifts directly into the airspace of the Phoenix metropolitan area, right over the heads of those 1.5 million people.
And it doesn't even stop there.
No, it doesn't. The reports continue tracking it, moving south, heading toward Tucson, and eventually fading out near the Mexican border.
The geographical spread is impressive, but the most vital piece of data in this entire sequence is the duration of the event.
The time it took.
Right. To cross that specific corridor from Henderson, Nevada to the Mexican border took approximately 2 hours.
Okay, let me play skeptic for a moment here, because my immediate instinct when I hear about a light in the sky traveling across a state is to assume it's astronomical.
Or if that's natural.
Like, could this have been a particularly large meteor? Or, maybe more likely, a piece of heavy space debris, like a dead satellite or a spent rocket booster degrading in orbit and burning up on re-entry.
It's the most logical first hypothesis for sure, but it collapses the moment you apply the physics of orbital mechanics to the timeline.
How so?
Well, a meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere is traveling at tens of thousands of miles per hour. It creates a brilliant streak due to friction, and the entire visual event lasts seconds.
Right, seconds. Not hours.
Exactly. A slow-moving piece of space debris might give you a slightly longer show, perhaps a minute or two of fragmentation as it streaks across the upper atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen footage of old satellites re-entering. They move incredibly fast across the sky. And they look like a cluster of fireballs trailing smoke.
Yeah, they're visibly succumbing to gravity and atmospheric drag. They are falling.
Oh, falling, okay.
Now, let's look at the Phoenix Lights timeline. The distance from Henderson to the Mexican border via that specific flight corridor is roughly 350 miles.
Okay.
If an object takes 2 hours to traverse 350 miles, we're looking at an average speed of somewhere between 150 and 200 miles per hour.
That's practically loitering. In aviation terms, 150 miles per hour is the cruising speed of a small single-engine Cessna.
It is absolutely not the speed of an object falling from orbit. It's the speed of an object navigating the lower atmosphere with deliberate intent.
So it wasn't burning up.
No, it was traveling. It maintained a controlled flight path over varied terrain for 2 solid hours.
That just changes the entire calculation. It wasn't a flash. It was a prolonged cruise.
Yes.
And because it was moving at such a leisurely pace, people had time to really look at it. So what were those 10,000 people actually seeing as it drifted over their towns?
To understand the visual, we have to rigorously filter out the cultural noise.
Right, the sci-fi stuff.
Exactly. We have to strip away decades of science fiction tropes and look solely at the consistent, overlapping structural details reported by independent witnesses, people who had no means of coordinating their stories.
The baseline visual, reported from Nevada all the way down to Tucson, is a massive formation of lights.
But these weren't independent lights swarming like a flock of birds.
No, and they weren't drifting randomly like weather balloons caught in a thermal either.
They were fixed. The accounts overwhelmingly describe the lights locked in a rigid V or triangular configuration.
A geometric shape that maintained absolute structural integrity as it moved. And again, the pacing is so crucial here.
It gave them time.
Right. The source material details how people were driving on the highway, noticed something strange blocking the sky out their windshield, and safely pulled their cars onto the shoulder.
They got out, stood by their vehicles, and just watched it.
People in residential neighborhoods saw it creeping over the rooftops, ran inside, grabbed their spouses and children, came back out. The object was still there.
Some even had the time to go find their bulky 1990s camcorders, power them up, and attempt to capture it on tape.
Which takes a minute. That kind of sustained observation window severely limits the possibility of mass optical illusion.
It really does. These were prolonged conscious evaluations of a physical structure.
But the visual aspect, as massive as it was, isn't the detail that makes this case so deeply unsettling.
No, it's not.
The most baffling physical characteristic detailed in these independent reports is the auditory data, or rather, the total lack of it.
The absolute absence of sound.
I really want to dig into the physics of this with you, because silence sounds peaceful, but in the context of aeronautics, it's actually an impossibility.
It breaks the rules.
Let's think about fluid dynamics and the displacement of air. If I'm standing by the side of a highway and a commercial semi-truck drives past me at 70 miles an hour, I don't just see the truck.
You experience it kinetically?
Exactly. I feel the wind shear hit my body. I hear the immense mechanical roar of the diesel engine. I physically feel the low-frequency vibration of the tires rolling over the asphalt, resonating in my chest.
Mass moving through a fluid medium, and remember, the atmosphere is a fluid medium, creates friction and pressure waves.
It has to move the air out of the way.
Right. It requires immense kinetic energy to displace that air, and that energy translates into acoustic noise.
So take that semi-truck and scale it up. Imagine an object not the size of a truck and not even the size of a Boeing 747, but an object the apparent size of a mountain.
A mountain moving through the sky.
Yeah. It's moving low over your neighborhood, cutting through the atmosphere at 150 miles an hour.
The aerodynamic pressure wave generated by a conventional physical structure of that size, moving at that speed and altitude, would be catastrophic.
It should produce a deafening, continuous roar, shouldn't it?
It absolutely should. The sheer volume of air being forcibly displaced over its leading edges should rattle the windows of every house it passes over. The engines required to keep something of that mass airborne against gravity should produce a decibel level that shakes the ground.
And yet, thousands of people specifically noted the dead silence.
Not a hum, not a whisper.
Not even the sound of rushing wind. Just a silent shadow sliding across the sky, eclipsing the stars.
That absence of sound is a critical data point because it violates the known mechanics of flight.
It means it's doing something we don't understand.
Exactly. It suggests a mechanism of transit that does not interact with the atmosphere in a conventional, friction-based manner.
Let's talk about the size, too, because I've been using phrases like the size of a mountain, and we need to clarify how researchers actually arrived at that scale for you.
It's important to be precise.
When you look up at the sky, depth perception is notoriously tricky. A small drone at 500 feet can look remarkably similar to a large aircraft at 30,000 feet. How do we actually know it was massive?
It's an excellent question, and it relies on a very elegant observational technique called occultation, combined with basic geometric triangulation.
Occultation, okay, like when the moon passes in front of the sun during an eclipse.
Precisely. Or how astronomers detect exoplanets when they pass in front of a distant star, temporarily blocking its light.
Oh, I see.
The object over Phoenix wasn't just a skeleton of lights. The lights were attached to a dark, solid mass that physically blocked out the background sky.
So, researchers interviewed witnesses spread across the entire Phoenix basin. You have witness A standing in their backyard in the northern suburbs, and witness B standing in a parking lot 10 miles away in the southern suburbs.
And they asked those witnesses a very specific question.
Which was?
Which exact stars or constellations did the dark mass block from your specific vantage point?
Oh, wow. So if witness A saw the object blot out the belt of Orion, and witness B simultaneously saw it blot out a different constellation entirely, you suddenly have hard geometric data.
Exactly. You know the exact geographic distance between the two witnesses on the ground. You know the fixed positions of the stars in the background.
Right.
By mapping the angles of occultation from multiple disparate points across the city, you can calculate the necessary altitude and width of the object required to cast that specific silhouette.
It's basically high school trigonometry applied to a massive real-world puzzle.
It is.
And when they ran those numbers, what did the math dictate?
The calculations resulted in an object with an apparent width of roughly 1 mile.
A mile across. A physical structure over 5,000 feet wide, flying directly over one of the most populated cities in the American Southwest.
It's hard to even picture.
It is. And a flying object of that scale, crossing sovereign airspace, demands a thorough public explanation from the military and the government. You simply cannot have a mile-wide anomaly cruise over 1 million people without the authorities addressing it.
And they did address it. An official explanation was provided to the public and the media.
But the explanation they provided introduces the most maddening aspect of this entire case. Because to accept the official story, you have to willingly ignore the timeline.
We need to examine the tale of two events. This is really where the public narrative fractures.
Yeah, and where the timeline becomes the ultimate arbiter of truth. Let's introduce the official government explanation. When the media pressed for answers, the authorities stated that the lights over Phoenix were the result of a military training exercise.
Specifically, the Maryland Air National Guard.
Right, operating out of a local base. They said the Guard dropped a series of high-intensity illumination flares over the Berry Goldwater Range, which is a massive expanse of military testing desert located south of Phoenix.
And we must be rigorous here. This part of the official narrative is completely factual.
It really happened.
Yes. The Maryland Air National Guard was absolutely conducting exercises. The military logs document the deployment of LUU-2BB illumination flares.
I want to make sure we aren't dismissing the flares out of hand, because understanding how they work explains why the government thought this excuse would stick.
Yeah.
How do these specific military flares operate?
These are not the small red flares you keep in the trunk of your car for a flat tire. These are heavy ordnance.
Okay.
They're dropped from military aircraft. They ignite in the atmosphere suspended by parachutes, and they burn with an intensity of roughly 2 million candle power.
Wow.
Yeah. They're designed to brilliantly illuminate a massive area of the battlefield at night.
So they burn incredibly bright, and because they are on parachutes, they descend very slowly.
They can linger in the sky for minutes. And from a distance, say, viewed from the northern suburbs of Phoenix, looking miles south toward the dark desert of the Goldwater Range, a staggered drop of these flares can visually resemble an angled, lingering formation of lights suspended in the sky.
Okay, so the flares existed. They looked visually impressive. But the entire explanation completely collapses when you look at the clock.
The timeline reveals a glaring anachronism.
The military logs confirm that the Maryland Air National Guard dropped those illumination flares over the Goldwater Range at approximately 10:00 p.m.
10:00 p.m. That is the critical data point.
So let's trace the logic. If a series of flares are dropped south of Phoenix at 10:00 p.m.,
Right.
how is it physically possible that they caused thousands of people to flood the 9/11 switchboards in Henderson, Nevada, 300 miles to the northwest at 7:30 p.m.?
It is causality running in reverse. It's a logical impossibility.
That's like trying to explain why my house burned down on a Tuesday by pointing out that my neighbor had a bonfire on Thursday. The cause cannot occur 2.5 hours after the effect.
What the official explanation attempts to do is take the documented, easily explainable second event, the 10:00 p.m. flare drop, and stretch it backwards through time and space to serve as a blanket explanation for the 7:30 p.m. massive craft sighting.
They just threw a tarp over the entire evening, painted the word flares on it, and hoped nobody would check the timestamps.
Flares dropped over a stationary range south of a city cannot account for a massive object flying directly overhead, low enough to occult the stars, hours earlier.
It makes no sense.
Flares do not travel from Nevada to Tucson over 2 hours. Flares do not maintain a rigid, mile-wide geometric structure.
Right?
And most importantly, flares emit light. They do not form a solid, dark silhouette that blocks out the sky behind them.
It's incredibly frustrating because the official explanation only works if you selectively edit out the thousands of witnesses who experienced the first event.
You have to ignore half the data.
Exactly. And it's one thing to dismiss everyday citizens as confused or prone to panic, but the people who were most insistent that the 7:30 p.m. event was not flares were the people whose entire professional lives revolved around the sky.
The professional observers. This is a crucial demographic in the source material.
Because they bring trained spatial judgment to the observation, right?
Absolutely. We were talking about commercial airline pilots. We're talking about police officers on patrol.
People who look at things for a living.
Yes. Former military personnel and air traffic controllers. These are individuals trained to remain calm, process visual data under pressure, and identify aerial threats.
Let's consider the former military personnel who witnessed this from the ground. When a trained aviator or radar operator looks up and sees an anomaly, their cognitive process is entirely different from a civilian's.
They don't just marvel at it, they initiate a mental diagnostic.
They're running through a mental Rolodex. I can imagine a veteran standing in his driveway watching this mile-wide triangle approach. Immediately, he's sorting through the variables.
Checking boxes?
Right. Okay, is this a squadron of conventional fighters flying in tight formation? No. The geometry is too perfectly rigid, there's no sound of jet engines, and there are no standard FAA anti-collision strobe lights.
Then they ask, is it an atmospheric phenomenon?
Right.
No, it has a solid physical boundary that is occulting the stars. Is it a known classified aircraft? No, it's far too large and moving far too slowly without stalling.
They systematically exhausted their entire inventory of known aeronautics and meteorology, and they just hit a wall.
A total dead end.
And what's compelling is that after the government rolled out the 10.0 p.m. flare explanation, these professionals did not stay quiet.
Their professional integrity wouldn't allow it. Many of them went on the record to state unequivocally that they had witnessed both events that night.
They saw the massive, silent structure at 7:30 p.m., and then hours later, they saw the military flares burning over the Goldwater Range.
And their consensus was unified. They knew the difference.
Yes, they did.
To a trained observer, a descending parachute flare looks like a descending parachute flare. It looks absolutely nothing like a rigid, structured craft passing overhead. The professionals were adamant that the first event was an entirely distinct physical phenomenon.
But this brings us to the most persistent, glaring question in this entire case.
The radar.
Yes. If I am an air traffic controller at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, and a solid, mile-wide object flies through my controlled airspace, why doesn't my radar screen light up like a Christmas tree? How does a floating mountain not trigger every proximity alarm in the state?
It's the most common counter-argument, and it requires a deep understanding of how aviation radar actually functions. We need to distinguish between secondary radar and primary radar.
Okay, let's break that down. When an air traffic controller is tracking a Delta flight coming in from Atlanta, they're mostly relying on secondary radar, right?
Correct. Secondary radar relies on a cooperative handshake.
Handshake.
Right. The ground station sends out a signal, and a transponder inside the commercial airliner actively replies. The transponder says, I am Delta Flight 123, my altitude is 20,000 feet, and my speed is 400 knots.
Got it.
The ATC screen takes that data and generates a neat little data block for the controller.
But obviously an unidentified mile-wide triangle is not going to have a cooperative transponder squawking its altitude to Sky Harbor.
Exactly. So air traffic control would have to rely solely on primary radar.
Which is what?
Primary radar is uncooperative. It is the raw physics of radio frequency reflection.
So primary radar is basically like shining a massive flashlight into a pitch-black canyon. You sweep the beam around, and if it hits the metallic side of an airplane, the light, or in this case the radio wave, bounces off the metal and reflects back to your eyes, or the radar dish.
That is a very solid analogy. The radar dish emits a pulse of RF energy. It hits the target, bounces back, and the system calculates the time delay to determine the distance, painting a raw blip on the screen.
But if primary radar is just bouncing waves off physical objects, a mile-wide object should create a massive bounce. Why wouldn't it?
Because of a concept called radar cross-section, or RCS. Primary radar relies on the object being reflective to specific radio frequencies.
Okay.
If an object is engineered to avoid detection, it manipulates those waves. Think of stealth technology. The F-117 Nighthawk or the B-2 Spirit bomber.
Both of which were fully operational black projects long before 1997.
Yes, and they defeat primary radar in two distinct ways. First, through geometry.
Geometry.
Right. Instead of being a rounded metallic cylinder like a commercial jet, which scatters radar waves in all directions, including back to the dish, stealth craft use severe faceted angles.
Oh, I see.
When the radar wave hits those angles, the energy is deflected away into the atmosphere rather than bouncing back to the receiver. To use your flashlight analogy, it's like hitting a mirror that is angled toward the ceiling. You don't see the reflection.
That makes perfect sense. And the second way?
Radar absorbent materials, or RAM. These are specialized coatings, often incorporating ferrite particles, that physically absorb the electromagnetic energy of the radar pulse and convert it into trace amounts of heat.
Wow. So it just eats the signal.
The energy soaks into the scare of the craft and dissipates.
So if we apply the physics of RCS reduction to the Phoenix lights, the absence of a primary radar return is not proof that the object wasn't there.
No, it's not.
It's proof that the object did not interact with radio frequency energy in a reflective manner.
Consider this. A B-2 Spirit bomber has a wingspan of over 170 feet, but on a primary radar screen, its RCS makes it look the size of a small bird.
That's incredible.
If the object over Phoenix possessed advanced geometric deflection or radar absorbent properties, it could easily be a mile wide visually while remaining electronically invisible to Sky Harbor's conventional radar sweeps.
It's honestly a terrifying thought that something so visually dominant could simply opt out of our detection grids.
It really is.
But while the military and the air traffic controllers were privately wrestling with blank screens, the civilian leadership of Arizona was facing a very different, very public meltdown.
They were dealing with the human fallout. A completely terrified populace demanding answers.
Which brings us back to Governor Fife Symington. The days following March 13 are a masterclass in political crisis management.
Or mismanagement, depending on how you look at it.
Right. You have the governor's office acting essentially as a war room. The phone lines are jammed. Citizens are terrified. Local politicians like City Councilwoman Frances Barwood are publicly demanding an investigation.
And Symington is sitting there with a massive operational problem.
Right, because the military is not providing him with actionable intelligence. Or they're offering the flare narrative, which he, as an aviator, knows perfectly well, does not explain the earlier event.
He's the executive of the state, he's expected to maintain order, and he has absolutely no truth to offer his constituents.
What does a political leader do when the truth is unavailable or too dangerous to admit, and the panic is rising?
They deploy a pressure release valve.
They create a distraction.
Exactly.
And the distraction Symington created was legendary. He calls a highly publicized press conference. The media is packed into the room, cameras are rolling, everyone is expecting a sober, severe update on the unidentified craft.
High tension.
Very high tension. Instead, Symington steps to the podium, announces they have found the culprit, and parades his chief of staff out in front of the cameras.
Wearing a full, ridiculous rubber alien costume, complete with handcuffs.
It was pure, cynical, theatrical comedy.
It really was.
And the brilliant, infuriating thing is, it worked.
Functionally, it was highly effective.
How so?
Well, the reporters laughed. The evening news ran the footage of the handcuffed alien instead of panicked citizens. It instantly changed the emotional frequency of the state.
It deflated the panic.
Exactly. It took a terrifying, massive unknown and reduced it to a Halloween joke. Symington utilized ridicule as a tool for public pacification.
He later admitted exactly that. He said the calls were paralyzing state infrastructure, and he just needed to lower the temperature.
But that admission came much later.
Right. For a decade, that press conference was his official stance. He went about his life, finished his term, and carried this secret for 10 years.
Until his 2007 editorial.
Yes. Out of office, unburdened by political consequences, he finally confirms what he actually experienced on March 13. He confirms that he wasn't just managing the crisis from a desk.
He was outside.
He had walked down to a park near his home, looked up into the Phoenix sky, and watched the massive, silent, V-shaped formation drift directly overhead.
He corroborated the core structural details reported by the thousands of civilians he had previously mocked. He noted the sheer scale, the impossible silence, and the deliberate speed.
The psychological toll of that decade is fascinating to me. Imagine standing in that park, an Air Force pilot, watching physics seemingly break down above your head.
It must have been paradigm shifting.
And then having to walk into an office, put on a suit, and publicly humiliate the people who saw exactly what you saw, simply because admitting, I don't know what that is, but it can fly with impunity over our state, would cause mass hysteria.
He chose to absorb the cognitive dissonance for the sake of public order.
But when he finally broke that silence, the specific language he used was carefully chosen, wasn't it?
Very carefully. He stated that, in his professional opinion, the craft was not of this world.
We really have to unpack the gravity of an Air Force veteran using that phrase. When a civilian says not of this world, it often just means it was really weird or it looked like something from a movie. It's an emotional descriptor.
Exactly. But when an aviator says it, it is an analytical conclusion.
It's a ruling out of options.
Yes! It means he has rigorously applied the scientific method to his observation. He has run through the decision tree of terrestrial technology. He has accounted for weather anomalies, optical illusions, conventional aircraft, and classified black projects, and he has found every single terrestrial branch of that tree completely insufficient to explain the data.
He didn't say it was a highly classified stealth project. He bypassed terrestrial origin entirely.
Which is an incredibly heavy assertion from a credible, trained observer who no longer had any political incentive to lie.
But let's follow that decision tree for a moment. Let's play devil's advocate here. If a former Air Force pilot ruled out conventional aircraft, what about the unconventional ones?
The black projects.
Right. Could this entire event simply have been the United States military testing something we just didn't know about yet?
The classified aircraft hypothesis. It is absolutely the most rational, grounded alternative to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and it deserves rigorous scrutiny.
Because the United States has a rich, documented history of flying things in the desert that technically don't exist.
Oh, absolutely. The aerospace legacy of the American Southwest is built on black projects. The U-2 spy plane in the 1950s, the A-12 ox cart, the F-117 Nighthawk.
All highly classified.
These were multi-billion-dollar paradigm-shifting technologies that were developed, tested, and flown for years in absolute secrecy before the public was ever made aware of them.
And they were tested at places like Area 51 in the Nevada desert, which is geographically right next door to where the Phoenix Lights sightings originated in Henderson.
The proximity to established classified testing ranges makes the hypothesis instantly compelling.
It does. And if we look at the physical attributes the witnesses described, a lot of them align with advanced military tech.
They do.
If you postulate a massive classified stealth blimp or a rigid formation of silent next-generation drones, that neatly explains the slow speed. It explains the rigid geometry.
And based on our earlier discussion about radar cross-section and radar absorbent materials, it perfectly explains why it didn't trigger primary radar alarms at Sky Harbor.
Exactly. Mechanically and physically, the classified hypothesis fits many of the observed parameters.
It does. But where the theory violently falls apart is when we examine operational logic.
Why doesn't the logic hold up?
Because the foundational objective of any classified aerospace program is operational security. Secrecy is the entire point.
Right, they want to keep it hidden.
When the military tests a $1 trillion black project out of Area 51, they adhere to obsessive protocols. They fly over restricted, unpopulated desert ranges.
Not cities.
Never cities. They fly in the dead of night, usually hours past midnight, precisely to minimize the risk of civilian observation or foreign satellite tracking.
So if you are a Pentagon program manager who has just successfully developed a silent, mile-wide, physics-defying aircraft, the absolute last thing you're going to do is take it for a slow 2-hour joyride directly over the 5th largest metropolitan area in the United States.
Especially at 8:00 p.m. on a clear Thursday evening, while 1.5 million people are awake and hanging out in their backyards.
Right. It would be an operational security failure of unprecedented, spectacular proportions.
You do not test highly sensitive, generation-skipping stealth technology by parading it low and slow over Phoenix during prime viewing hours. It violates every known protocol of classified development.
It's like building the world's most secret advanced submarine and then deciding to test it by surfacing in the middle of a crowded public beach on the 4th of July.
Exactly.
It defies basic common sense.
The classified aircraft hypothesis might explain the physical characteristics of the craft, but it completely fails to explain the behavior of the flight path. It creates as many logical problems as it attempts to solve.
Which brings us back to the bedrock of this deep dive. The element that makes this case so deeply unshakable, and the reason we are still dissecting it decades later, the collective witness problem.
Up to 10,000 independent observers.
Spread across hundreds of miles of diverse geography.
Operating without the benefit of modern social media, cell phone networks, or any means to coordinate their narratives in real time.
That's key. They couldn't talk to each other.
No, they couldn't, yet the data they provided, the rigid V-shape, the sheer massive scale, the impossibly slow speed, and the defining silence remain remarkably consistent across the board.
You cannot induce a mass hallucination of a specific geometric shape, blocking out specific stars across that wide of a geographic area. It's statistically impossible.
They were all observing a shared physical reality.
The sheer volume of robust, corroborating data is what elevating this beyond a fringe sighting into a definitive historical anomaly.
It absolutely is.
We have covered a massive amount of ground here for you today, from orbital mechanics and fluid dynamics to radar physics and political theater. Let's synthesize the immovable facts of this deep dive.
Fact 1. There were unequivocally 2 distinct events on the night of March 13, 1997.
Event 1 began at 7:03 p.m. in Nevada. It was a massive, silent, unidentified structure that traveled deliberately for 2 hours across the state of Arizona.
Event 2 occurred at 10:00 p.m. south of Phoenix. The Maryland Air National Guard dropped real, documented illumination flares.
And the most critical fact, the 10:00 p.m. flares cannot, under any laws of physics or linear time, explain the 7:40 p.m. sighting.
They just can't.
The official explanation relies entirely on an anachronism.
The data proves that something massive, exhibiting capabilities beyond conventional aerospace engineering, crossed sovereign airspace with impunity. What it was and how it operated remains technically unresolved.
But the human element of this case is what truly lingers for me. Think about Fife Symington, the man tasked with leading a state, who realized in an instant that there was a hierarchy of power above his own that he just could not explain.
He managed budgets, passed legislation, and governed millions of people, all while privately carrying the weight of a broken sky for 10 years.
He was caught in an impossible intersection between his duty to prevent public panic and the empirical evidence of his own eyes.
It's a profoundly isolating position to be in.
It really is. The official explanation of the military flares has been repeated by government spokespeople and media outlets for nearly 30 years. It is safe, it's tidy, and it fits perfectly back into those comfortable boxes we discussed at the beginning of this dive.
It allows us to go to sleep without worrying about the binary.
Right, but it only ever answered half the question. It deliberately ignored the 2-hour window where the rules of our reality were suspended.
The official narrative relied heavily on the public's inherent willingness to accept a plausible-sounding answer without interrogating the timeline.
And that reality leaves us with a necessary, unsettling question to consider as we wrap up. If a physical object the size of a mountain can navigate over 1.5 million people for 2 hours,
if it can be scrutinized by commercial pilots, police officers, and an aviation-trained governor,
and if it can still be successfully dismissed in the historical record by simply pointing to a completely different event that happened hours later,
it forces a profound reevaluation of how truth is managed and distributed.
It demands we ask, what else in our history has been hidden in plain sight? What other massive, foundational anomalies have been quietly swept under the rug simply because the official explanation was just plausible enough and repeated just loudly enough to stop the public from asking basic questions about the timeline? You have to wonder. The sky isn't always clean, and sometimes what moves through it refuses to fit into any box we possess. Keep looking up.
You've been listening to Side Quests of Reality. The full case file for this episode is available at www.sidequestsofreality.com. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who asks the right questions. Subscribe. The next case is already open and will be available soon.